Our story begins in Transoxiana, known in Arabic as Mawar al-Nahr, the land beyond the river. The Muslims first entered Transoxiana under the rulership of the Umayyad Caliph Abd al-Malik in the early 8th century. During this period of Islamic expansion, Qutayba bin Muslim conquered Khorasan, Bukhara and Samarkand. Owing to the significance of both Bukhara and Samarkand in the region, they became the central point for the spread of Islam and were charitable endowments or kaf for the purpose of establishing goodness in society and leading to its prosperity, along with for military readiness and expansion were given. Due to the importance attached to Samarkand by the Caliphate, it soon became the hub of intellectual curiosity in the region, with children from all over Transoxiana being sent to Samarkand for their education. As the Umayyad Caliphate collapsed and was replaced by the Abbasid Caliphate, the Caliph gave governorship to the sons of Asad ibn Samad due to their services to the Caliphate during rebellions and battles. Nu ibn Asad was given Samarkand, and the other brothers were given other parts of the region. Hence, the Samanids were born. By the time of 900 AD, the Samanids, under the leadership of Ismail Samani, had complete control of the region and ruled de facto independently from the Caliph in Baghdad. This stability and prosperity that the Samanids brought allowed the sciences to flourish in both Bukhara and Samarkand, both becoming centers of knowledge in Central Asia. The Central Asian environment in particular distinguished itself in philosophical inquiry and rational theology. This was due to the requirement of the age. Unlike Arabia, Central Asia was home to an immense amount of religions, from pagans to Jews, from Magians to animists, and therefore special care had to be given to develop systems by which one can argue with these different groups and to bring them into the fold of Islam. So while Arabia was known for its expertise in the sciences of Quran, exegesis, ahadith, history, and law, Transoxiana became known for its expertise in jurisprudence, philosophy, and rational theology. So ingrained was debating and intellectual engagement in Transoxiana that the rulers would themselves host debates and bring in arbitrators and scholars to determine victors, a tradition that would continue much into the future of the region. Returning to the time, however, the Mu'tazila were initially the dominant group in the region due to their backing by the caliphs in Baghdad. But soon new ways of rational theology would emerge, just as they had emerged in Baghdad, led by Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari. It was during this era of intellectual development that Abu Mansur Al Maturidi was born in 853 AD in a district called Maturid near Samarkand. Very little is known about his early life. What we do know is that he studied under the towering Muqatil al-Razi, who was at the forefront of transmitting the vast ocean of knowledge that are the works of Abu Hanifa. There are claims that he was a student of Al-Hakam ibn Abdullah al-Balkhi, who was the student of Abu Hanifa himself, but there is much doubt about this. Regardless, he would narrate the works of Abu Hanifa, including his monumental Fiqh al-Akbar and al-Wasiyya. It is very clear that this early exposure to such level of scholarship made al-Maturidi a firm follower of the Hanafi school of law. It is also very clear that it made him into a man of reason, because the Hanafis in Central Asia were known to do kalam because they wanted to respond to the various groups that were found in Central Asia. Al-Maturidi then studied under the immense Hanafi scholars of his time, such as Abu Bakr Ahmad bin Asaq al-Juzjani and Nusair bin Yahya al-Balkhi, both of whom were the students of Abu Sulaiman al-Juzjani, who was the student of Abu Yusuf, who was then the student of the great Imam Abu Hanifa. The chain of Al-Maturidi then is directly to Abu Hanifa. Al-Maturidi hence was from the pedigree of scholarship in Central Asia, which shows in the refined nature and systematic approach that he had. He, just like his contemporary Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari, believes that reason and revelation are both reconcilable and commanded. But he went a bit further than his contemporary Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari, because his system is far more refined and it is far more formal, reflecting the expertise in rational theology and in philosophical inquiry that is found in Transoxiana compared to the expertise found in Ahadith, law, and Quran exegesis that is in Arabia. Additionally, just like his contemporary Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari, he also deemed the thought of the Mu'tazila to be both religiously and rationally at fault, writing extensively against them. But unlike his contemporary Al Maturidi didn't only write against the Mu'tazila, because as we previously talked about, there were various groups in Central Asia. So he wrote against the naturalists, the Magians, the atheists, and all of the different variations of beliefs that were found in Central Asia. Even though it wasn't clear at the moment, and neither was it after his death, Al Maturidi would go on to shape Islamic theology for another millennium. The immense scholar Abu Moin al-Nasafi, when describing the scholarly personality of al-Maturidi, says, profoundly knowledgeable and genius. If in the scholarly environment in which al-Maturidi lived there had been no other scholar but him, he alone would have been sufficient to fill that role. Those who are aware of the subtleties in his works, his ability to discover and evaluate proofs, and who understand the successful method he followed in silencing his opponents and in observing the etiquettes of scholarly debate, recognize al-Maturidi's true rank. Indeed, his teacher, Abu Nasr al-Iyadi, would not speak in scholarly assemblies in which al-Maturidi was absent. When he saw al-Maturidi from afar, he would gaze at him admiringly, and every time he would say, "Your Lord creates what he wills and chooses." Now for the basic thought and methodology of al-Maturidi. His thought and methodology is very similar to his contemporary Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari, both in method and in views. However, unlike his contemporary, al-Maturidi's thought is more refined and systematic. We will not go into the basics of rational theology or the basic views of the Mu'tazila, because we have already covered that in the documentary on Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari. Over here, we will focus more on the method and the views of al-Maturidi himself. Al-Maturidi believed that revelation itself demands one to reason and invites one not only to reason but also to employ argumentation and an invitation to show demonstration for beliefs. Al-Maturidi hence endeavored to form a systematic rational theology by which he could affirm and show proofs for the scriptural beliefs and argue against or refute the arguments that were present against the basic scriptural beliefs. In this endeavor, al-Maturidi arrived at an epistemology that is quite unique to himself, that is very different from groups before and after him. And al-Maturidi's works are highly extensive, systematic, and at times notoriously difficult and obscure. It is better if we systematically go through the most famous work of al-Maturidi, which is his Book of Monotheism, or in Arabic, Kitab al-Tawhid wa Ithbat al-Sifat, the Book of Monotheism and an affirmation of the attributes. It's an utterly brilliant gem of a work. It's his magnus opus, after all. And in it, al-Maturidi responds to various different groups at the time, from the Mu'tazila to the different Islamic groups, and to the naturalists, to the sophists, to the animists. And in it, al-Maturidi shows the pinnacle of rational theology at the time. Since we talked about ontology and the differences between the Kalam schools and the Mu'tazila in our documentary on Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari, over here we will focus on epistemology and the arguments for the existence of God. Al-Maturidi begins his book by acknowledging the various beliefs and religious traditions that exist amongst mankind. Each and every single one of these religious traditions claims truth for itself and falsity for all of the other religious traditions, and therefore we must show the veracity of one religious tradition beyond rational doubt. In order to do this, al-Maturidi begins his work formally, just like all Kalam works begin, by his talk on his own epistemology. For him, there are only three ways of knowing something. As he writes, the way leading to knowledge of the reality of things consists of sensation, reports, and reflection. Al-Maturidi defines sensation as it is the source that includes knowledge having no counterpart from the category of ignorance. This primarily refers to the senses, man's knowledge of his own self and the causes and feelings that occur within him. Al-Maturidi takes particular issue with those who deny this form of self-knowledge, arguing that it is forbidden to debate with them because they have no epistemology. They deny all knowledge and hence no foundation exists upon which we can engage with them. He writes on this. He fails to affirm his denial and his existence, whereas the discussion is conducted on the whatness or isness of a thing. However, he not only denies these two, but he also denies the fact that he denies them. Yet one can ridicule him by saying to him, "Do you know that you are negating?" If he says no, his negation becomes invalid. If he says yes, then he affirms his negation. Thus, by his negation, he negates his negation. He further goes on to state that many of the objections against the senses arise due to their limitation or their malfunction. For example, a blind person who cannot see, or a person in a dream who sees contradictory things. The difference between obstacles to the senses and the truth being displayed after these obstacles are removed is known via reason. The second is reports. Here, Al Maturidi takes an encompassing view of reports, including the very speech a man uses to convey any meaning as a report, which would render the negation of the report absurd, as in order to negate it, one would have to use it. For Al Maturidi, if one denies reports, he cannot know the following things. He cannot know his lineage, name, whatness, name of his substance, or the name of anything. It follows that he cannot know the sensory things, and if he is asked about what he sees, he cannot convey it. How can he attain knowledge of what may not reach him from things that are absent from him? Or how can he know his means of livelihood and subsistence? Because all these reach him through reports. Denying reports involves denying the greatest blessings of God to man, the blessing of speech and understanding, which forms the basis of superiority of human beings to irrational animals. In here, Al-Maturidi introduces the concept of mutawatir, which means man's transmission. He, like all of the tradition before and after him, follows the opinion that it is inconceivable that such a broad group of people can agree upon a lie, and therefore it is necessary to agree with that which is mass transmitted. Over here, Al Maturidi tackles an objection that people make, that since every single individual in the mass transmission is fallible and it is possible that he can lie, how can it be that the mass transmission as a whole is infallible? He responds to this objection by saying, in fact, although no proof is established to demonstrate that every one of the group who transmits the mutawatir is infallible, if the reports conveyed by them reach this limit in profusion, it becomes clear that the reporters are veracious and they are collectively protected from lying, even though the opposite of this may turn out to be the case when they are evaluated individually. Al-Maturidi then provides the same form of reasoning for ijma consensus of the scholars, arguing that similarly it must be necessarily followed. A more refined response to such an objection is made by the later scholar Sa'd ad-Din al-Taftazani, in which he argues that even though one individual person in the chain does not grant certainty, this chain as a whole still grants certainty, just like a string of a rope in of itself is not capable of holding something or is sturdy enough, but nonetheless when it is combined into a rope, it is both sturdy and capable of holding massive weights. Another example of this is that even though a wall is made up of small bricks, that does not render the wall small. And even though the bricks are individually small, they can still nonetheless form a big wall when they are combined together in a whole. For Al-Maturidi, singular reports do not reach the level of obliging knowledge, nor in witnessing the truth, as they are a probable endeavor, and their truth and falsehood must be known by an exhaustive inquiry into the personal states of the transmitter. Nonetheless, if they turn out to be more probable, they should be followed. The third part of Al-Maturidi's epistemology is reflection or reason. The need for it is for 9 reasons as per Al-Maturidi. It is needed for the knowledge imparted by the senses and by reports. This need relates to objects that are far from the senses or are too small, and to reports that may be true or false, needed to distinguish between miracles and the works of the magicians. Similarly, it is required to judge the states of the person who performs those miracles. 3. For obligations from God. In order to dispute reflection, one has to partake in it. Hence, and disputation necessitates reflection, necessary in order to know wisdom and the nature of things. Either they are necessary, self-generated, or possible, generated by another. Human being has been granted management of others and of things. To know justice and judge between good and bad, reason must be employed. Doubt is only removed by reflection. Displaying it leads to truth and dispels falsehood. Benefit and harm, beauty and ugliness can only be known after reports and senses know them. If these things about them remain to be discovered, then the only way to do so is by using reflection and reason. The desire and reason are at odds. Nature finds something repelling, but reason deems it beneficial, and vice versa. Hence, every matter must be closely examined before a proper judgment about it can be made. This then is the basic epistemology that Al-Maturidi gives in Kitab al-Tawhid. It is very important to note over here that Al-Maturidi rejects inspiration as a form of knowledge. Al-Maturidi places a huge emphasis upon reason, but if the viewer was paying attention, he would realize that he does not really distinguish between deduction and induction, even though he obviously acknowledges that certain knowledge does come from deduction, and a knowledge that is more probable in nature, what we call induction, is something that he clearly separates from deductive knowledge, but he places both of them under the same category, which he names reflection. Now to move on to Al Maturidi's evidences for the origination of the world and for the existence of God. Al Maturidi does a very unique thing over here, which is that he provides arguments from experience, even though the rational arguments that he provides follow the same sort of terminology that would be used much later on, but they are not as yet that refined as they would become refined over the centuries of debate and argumentation. For him, there are three evidences for the origination of the world, which is narration, which refers to scripture, experience, and reason. As for narration, Al-Maturidi goes on to provide basic scriptural evidences, such as God being the creator of everything, the originator of everything, and having dominion over everything. As for sensory evidences, Al-Maturidi goes on to provide five evidences and experiences that show that the world is originated. First is the observation that all things are surrounded by need and necessity. For Al-Maturidi, eternity is the condition for independence because something is independent of others due to its eternity, while necessity and need render it dependent on others. From this, he argues that it follows that the world is originated. As for the second, Al-Maturidi extends this dependence on inanimate objects due to their changes being done on account of the living. As for the third, he argues that one sees different and contrary natures experienced in things. The reality of these natures is to repel and becomes distant from the other. This then requires something other than themselves to aggregate them in one composite body. The fourth is that he argues, since it is known via experience that parts of the universe begin and end, and also that expansion and enlargement of the universe occurs, it follows then that the universe is originated because the aggregate of finite parts cannot become infinite. One may argue that Al-Maturidi over here is committing the fallacy of composition. However, this is not the case because his argument is that the world that is composed solely of temporarily originated parts cannot in total be anything other than temporarily originated, just like a wall that is composed of solely concrete parts cannot be anything other than a concrete wall. The fifth is that things contain in themselves contrary realities, which is evidence of change and disappearance, which is in turn evidence of extinction and destruction. The further evidence he provides for this is the aggregation and separation of a thing. For example, when we say I am human, we mean a living human with all the necessary attributes required for it. If I was to die and cease to be a human and am destroyed, the body I left behind is a carcass of that which used to be a human. It is now something other than what it was. That previous thing has been extinguished and a new has begun. From this, he argues that that which exists by itself cannot be extinguished, and hence it is necessary for the world which does not exist by itself to be brought into existence by another. As for the rational proof, Al-Maturidi provides an earlier rendition of an argument that would become known as Al-Burhan al-Hadud al-Atsam, the emergence of bodies, something which is popularized in a weaker form in the shape of the Kalam cosmological argument by William Lane Craig. Now, it is recommended for the viewers to watch my video on Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari, wherein I cover basic Ash'ari atomism because it is very relevant for this argument. But if you have already watched that video or you know basic Ash'ari atomist ontology, then let's just dive right into it. Al-Maturidi starts his argument by presenting two states of bodies, motion and stillness. A body is either in motion or is in stillness. These two cannot unite in eternity. One of them is temporal, and a temporal thing cannot be created in pre-eternity, hence both are temporal. Thereby a body cannot be devoid of motion or stillness, is temporarily generated. Then he argues that bodies are not devoid of stillness or motion or both of them successively. To this he adds another proof that it is impossible for two opposites to unite at the same time and place. It is hence impossible for there to be ugliness and beauty, stillness and motion, aggregation and separation. Therefore, these are the accidents must come one after the other. And this entails temporal generation. All temporally originated things come into existence from non-existence or nothing. This then is Al-Maturidi's basic argument for the origination of the world. It is important to note over here that this argument, due to centuries of debates after Imam Maturidi, was further refined and made more formalized. However, that does not really concern us right now. From this, then we move on to Al-Maturidi's arguments for the existence of God. And perhaps the most peculiar argument to Al-Maturidi is his argument for the existence of God from evil. Yes, you heard that right. The existence of God from evil as an evidence. Now, Obviously, the majority of people, they doubt the existence of God due to evil, whereas Al-Maturidi does the ultimate reversal. He argues the existence of God from the existence of evil. He writes, if everything could possess the most beautiful states and best qualities, bad and ugly things would disappear. The existence of the bad and ugly proves that they exist because of an agent that is external to themselves. In essence, what Al Maturidi is arguing over here is that unless there is an external agent, all things would reach naturally to their most perfect and complete states. But since this does not occur, the only explanation for its non occurrence is that an external agent stops them from reaching their most complete and perfect states. To this, then, Al Maturidi gives different arguments that are both more commonly known and specific to the Islamic tradition for the existence of God. For example, one of the arguments that he makes is that a thing cannot cause itself, as that is absurd, because in order for a thing to cause itself, it must first exist itself, as causing is preconditioned upon existence. Al Maturidi writes on this. If the world came into existence by itself, its coming into existence by itself would either be after its existence, so that the claim it came into existence by itself would be disproved because it came into existence due to something else, or before its existence. Yet, how can a thing bring itself into existence before it exists? Also, if it came into existence by itself before it existed, one could consider it non existent. Thus, it would be a non existent agent. This is too impossible. Additionally, he argues that no state, quality, time, or mode of existence would be preferable if a thing brought itself into existence. Whereas, when we see various different states, times, and qualities, the only explanation for this is that it did not bring itself into existence. In terms of arguments that Al Maturidi gives that is specific to the Islamic tradition, he argues from the interdependence between accidents and substances. For a thing must be either in stillness or motion. It cannot be conceived that it is in neither. And in order for it to be in stillness or motion, there must be a substance to which it applies. Because without a substance, there is no such thing as motion or stillness. And since the entire universe is composed of these substances, it can neither bring itself into existence, since it requires a cause to do that, and neither can it subsist itself, since it requires a cause to do that as well. Now that Al-Maturidi has shown an external agent to the world, he endeavors to show monotheism. It is very interesting on how he begins this discussion by saying that no one really disregards unity, because even with the polytheists who propose various gods, they also have to start with one, because all numbers begin with one. Hence, the only question that arises is that is it only one? Over here, Al Maturidi brings a very simple argument that if there were many different gods, then there would be many different wills, and all of them would have to coincide in order for something to be created. And so the question arises, is this agreement by necessity or by subjugation? If it is by subjugation, it is very simple that the one being subjugated cannot be God. And additionally, Al Maturidi argues to this is that there cannot be two causes for one effect. And so, since there are effects, either it is only one god who is causing them, or all other causes or all other gods become completely needless and there is no reason to postulate their existence. He writes on this, as for the states, they are either equal or different in all the meanings of lordship. If states are equal, this equality is a single quality termed number, which results in them preventing one another. If the states are different, the most perfect state is worthy of lordship. As for the acts, the whole world is in harmony. Despite the contrasting and opposition between the natures, it is as if the contrary natures are similar, supporting each other, such as the existence of one assists the other to endure. If the contrary natures are as I have said, then it has been established that this joining despite opposition is only possible thanks to a wise, knowledgeable, and subtle ruler whose rule cannot be challenged and whose decree cannot be opposed. This then is the argument that Al-Maturidi uses for monotheism. There are, however, many more refined arguments that the later tradition makes, and we will go into them because they only require a few sentences for us to expound upon. So the main argument is that if there are two necessary beings, they are either different to one another, as if they were identical, they would not be two but one. Hence, the question arises, is that which differentiates them necessary? If so, the one which doesn't possess it is contingent. If that which differentiates them is contingent, then the one which possesses it is contingent. Al-Ghazali over here also gives a similar argument. The only difference is that he replaces necessity with perfection. And so, in order for there to be two necessary beings, there must be something that differentiates them. And so, similarly, the question arises, is that which differentiates them perfect? If so, then the one that does not possess it can become more complete and can become more perfect. Therefore, it is contingent. And if that which separates them or differentiates them is imperfect, then the one that possesses it is imperfect, incomplete, and therefore it is contingent. There are countless more things that we can talk about from Kitab al-Tawhid, such as al Maturidi's argument against the naturalist, against the atheists, or such as his very interesting positions on the attributes of God. But due to considerations of times, this is all that we will go into from Kitab al-Tawhid this time. As for al Maturidi's influence, he would lead to the second biggest theological school in the history of Islam, the Maturidi School of Theology. Amongst those who follow his school were giants such as Al-Hakim al-Samarkandi, Abu Mu'in al-Nasafi, Umar al-Nasafi, al-Ghaznavi, Jalaluddin al-Rumi, Ali al-Qushti, Bahuddin al-Naqshband, Ibn al-Humam, Shams al-Din al-Fenari, Ahmad Sirhindi, Jalambavi, Nizamuddin Sehalvi, Ibn Abidin, Fazl Haq Khairabadi, and countless others. With al-Maturidi's documentary, we have covered, in my opinion, the most influential people of the 8th, 9th century, starting with the father of jurisprudence, Ash-Shafi, then going to the backbone of Islamic rational theology, Abu Hassan al-Ashri, diving into the deepest depths of spirituality with the master of the way, Abu al-Qasim al-Junayd, and now with the architect of Islamic theology, Abu Mansur Al Maturidi. Following this era, we will now dive into the 10th century giants, among whom they are perhaps the most famous and non-Islamic thinkers of all times. However, that is a story for another day. This then brings us to an end on our documentary on Abu Mansur Al Maturidi. If you are interested in his contemporary Abu Hassan al-Ashri, I did a video on him that you can watch over here. If you are interested in the origins of early Islamic mysticism and Sufism, then I've done a documentary on the master of the way, Abu al-Qasim al-Junayd, which you can watch over here. But that is all that I have for you today. Stay faithful, and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.